pedagogical grammar. Um, I'm going to start out with this sort of dilemma that we're all very familiar with, this juxtaposition, sort of competing interests between the community and linguists. And of course, this is a generalization. It's not always the case, but we tend to come across this issue where the language community has the goal of language reclamation. And I have the definition here for those of you who are not familiar with Leonard's definition of language reclamation. So a larger effort by a community to claim its right to speak language and set associated goals in response to community needs and perspectives. So we have this interest on the one hand, and then on the other, Spies acknowledges that the knowledge and perspective that one gets from language from studying it linguistically tends to be skewed toward the topics that bear on linguists' interest in language universals. So oftentimes the linguist is coming in, they have a particular grammatical feature that they're looking to capture, to document, and then you have the community where their goals are vastly different. So the two questions that I pose to I guess all of us here to think about is, how do we reconcile these vastly different goals? And number two, how can linguistic research be leveraged for language reclamation? And so for my talk today, I'm going to give a background about my own research with Cahuilla, and then my positionality and research approach, which I have developed and is an extension of the community-based research model that was discussed throughout the day today. And then how am I applying it to my project? And then finally, I'll close with some of the broader implications of this research. So I study, Cahuilla is a small Uto-Aztecan language, belongs to the very large family. Uto-Aztecan, as we zoom in here to Southern California, we can see that Cahuilla belongs to a smaller branch of Takic languages. And the work that I've done is here indicated with the arrow at the Torres Martinez Desert Cahuilla Indian Reservation. So that's where I did all of my dissertation work, my field work there. Currently, there are language rekindlement efforts underway in my community, and we're working on creating a new cohort of L2 or second language speakers. My positionality, so as I mentioned before, I'm a Cahuilla community member, a linguist. I'm an L2 speaker of Cahuilla, also a postdoc scholar currently, and a member of the Natives for Linguistics group under the Linguistic Society of America. As far as my research approach, I tend to follow the indigenous research methodologies, which I'll get to in a little bit, for those who aren't familiar with those theories. So using the indigenous research methodologies and Cahuilla ways of knowing as a starting point for any of my research. This is where I start from. Considering how my research can be leveraged for language reclamation, and most importantly, how can I be relationally accountable to the community? So how does my work equate to relational accountability? And so therefore, my research always asks, the following questions: am I using indigenous research methodologies? How can I use my data, my research for language reclamation? And am I being relationally accountable? And two, avoiding extractive practices. And I'll also get to that in a few minutes. So a lot of my the principles that guide my work, again, are from the indigenous research methodology literature. These are two seminal works by Duhigg, Smith, and Wilson. Of course, these are not exhaustive, but these are the main works that I draw a lot of my principles from. And many indigenous scholars in North America also are beginning to incorporate indigenous research methodologies in linguistics. So Tawai Smith defines indigenous research methodologies as indigenous research methodologies tend to approach cultural protocols, values, and behaviors as an integral part of the methodology. They are factors to be built into the research explicitly, to be thought about reflexively, to be declared openly as part of the research design, to be discussed as part of the final results of a study, and to be disseminated back to the people in culturally appropriate ways and in ways that they can understand it. And I think this is probably an important point because a lot of times our linguist jargon gets lost on our communities, so we need to make sure that they're understanding the relevance of our work. Along with that, Wilson also mentions the 3 R's, respect, reciprocity, and relationality. The most important of these, relationality, being relationally accountable to the communities within which we work. And Leonard also talks about relationality in terms of how do we measure is our work relationally accountable, and he refers to this idea of a relationality quotient. So it asks the question, does the particular project, to the extent possible, for the particular location and context, demonstrate and facilitate relational accountability as far as reciprocity, rights, responsibility, relevance, and he has so many other R words that he likes to use. And then lastly, with regard to avoiding extractive linguistic practices, Davis also says that extractive linguistic practices can include defining, analyzing, and representing languages and the people connected to them separately from the complex socio-historical, political, and deeply personal context in which they actually occur, and also the presentation of languages as objects, data, without their complex and varied human contexts. And this is a great challenge within the discipline of linguistics to sort of separate or sort of see languages as not as objects, but as people, a living, vibrant community without whom these languages would not exist. Furthermore, Leonard also mentions these other examples of extractive practices, dissecting language examples, mining language archives or corpora, and privileging benefits to the scientific community. For example, when some linguists often say, what does language X contribute to us, where us is exclusive and not including the community? What they're talking about is to the field of linguistics. I would also say that adding to Leonard's list, this embodiment of data from speakers, I've noticed that a lot of presentations tend to either not list the individuals who contributed, not include photographs of them. They're always listed as, sort of tertiary or further down authors. And also, although in some cases, participants do want to remain anonymous, sometimes they're just referred to as, speaker A or speaker B, or actually just given a code number, like, whatever methods that we use to code things for our metadata. And then also ensconcing of research results. So some documentation, at least I know for my community, was largely inaccessible. It was kind of archived away and nobody knew about it. And so sometimes that happens where a linguist will kind of like finish their work and then move on to their next project. And then, the materials are not accessible to the community. So these are all sort of examples of extractive practices that we want to avoid I'd say as a discipline, as researchers and linguists, best practices would say, avoiding these, taking measures to avoid these practices in your research. Now I'm going to quickly go over some of the research models that have been proposed, and then I'll juxtapose my own model that I'm proposing. And this is the first time I'm presenting this research about my grammar project, so you guys are privileged to hear the first iteration of this. As mentioned before, there have been different models for collaborative documentation or research projects. Cameron has listed several different stages of advocacy, and then, of course, Czaykowska-Higgins kind of is like the culmination of all of those ideas where we're supposed to be doing research on, for, with, and by the language community. Czaykowska-Higgins model, it shows a greater degree of collaboration in several aspects. However, there are some gaps in that model. Mainly, there's no mention of maintaining relational accountability. There's also no mention of what is the role of the Indigenous community member linguists, such as myself. So someone of my particular training, where do I fit into that model? I think it's only assumed that there's non-native linguists and then community members, but no in between. And then finally, importance of language authorities. So what I propose is a different model in which the research is rooted in Indigenous research methodologies, one that privileges language authorities and reclamation goals, and also the primary investigator is also able to be a community member. And so this model, which I'm calling Indigenous-based research, language research, is research on, for, with, and by the language-speaking community that also seeks to maintain relational accountability to the community where the research takes place and to which it takes effect. And so how am I applying these ideas to my particular project? So the Cahuilla Pedagogical Grammar Project is a community-centered project. I've made sure that there are multiple points of engagement with my community. So it's not just a one and done thing where we actually I've built in several points of engagement, incorporating Indigenous research methodologies, the 3 R's, and then also the grammar will be based on the actual linguistic practices of the community. So it will be domain-based versus grammar-based, and also we'll discuss linguistic diversity. Again, I use the 3 R's in considering how I was going to create my grammar, and utilizing research from my dissertation also is going into the grammar, as well as some archival materials. And then most importantly, I have included multiple opportunities for the community to engage with the project. So our existing grammar, which is largely inaccessible because it was reference grammar written for linguists, so the language is just terribly highfalutin, technical language, which even a linguist might be scratching their head at because of course, the German linguist who worked on this kind of used his own unique terms. And then, but the new grammar will be topic-based. It will discuss all of our dialects, all of our variation, and actually celebrate and welcome all of the different ways that people speak within the community today. So there's 3 components to my study. So I start off with a survey and focus groups with university students taking the Cahuilla language classes, also community members. And then once that happens, I will pilot some of the drafts of the first lessons in the community, so actually in the community, and then get feedback on the final draft. So they'll actually input twice on the 2 initial drafts. It's going to be a sort of holistic approach, different formats for the questions. I'm collecting both quantitative and qualitative data to ensure that we can capture the full scope of what the community is looking for in a grammar. And then, so some sample questions ask about their attitudes about learning language, which way do you learn best, auditory, visual, kinetic, and all of these will go into the design of the grammar. So that's all going to inform it. And finally, this is sort of the model that I'm doing. It's a cyclical model where we go to the community, create a draft, go back to the community, create a draft, and finally our final draft. And so it's a cyclical model. This isn't a linguistic concept. It's actually the Deming model, just the continuous improvement model. But I liken it to, in my culture, weaving a basket. So it's also a cyclical model where you're continually adding to it. And so we're kind of incorporating the community's input as we weave our basket. And then I'm hoping to that this project will use my research, archival research, all to be incorporated into the grammar. The content will be relative, engaging, and culturally appropriate. Also, most importantly, that it will be relationally accountable to the community because they're going to be giving me feedback along the whole process. And then most importantly, to develop this as a best practices model that can be replicated within other communities. And I know I'm running out of time or already ran out of time, so I'm just going to leave some time for questions.
Thank you so much. Right? Does anyone have any questions for our speaker today? Yes.
Thank you so much for this super interesting and valuable talk. I'm also writing a pedagogical grammar. One of the challenges that I have is that presenting vocabulary in a way that's contextualized is like not so difficult, but presenting sentences and paradigms in a way that doesn't decontextualize them from actual speakers and speech events is like a lot more challenging. So I'm wondering if you could say anything about how you're thinking of presenting examples in the grammar.
Yeah, I think that we're going to use verb paradigms, but rather than presenting them like just in isolation, because with Cahuilla, our verbs are fully conjugated, full sentences, but rather I think you're right that in thinking about it, those aren't very useful for our speakers because they can't just learn that and go down the street and try to talk to somebody with just a verb. So probably they're going to be verb paradigms, but they're going to be in fuller context so that people can see the examples in everyday language.
Hi, thanks very much for this very important project. I had a question about, it's really important what you said about having the feedback of the community, but I was wondering what you referred as community, because as we know, community or communities are always quite heterogeneous, and you may have different feedbacks, even contradictory ones. So are you going to integrate that? Also because there is a highly rate of variation, you said. So yeah. Is it a plurality of voices on the grammar included in the grammar?
Yeah, so my aim is to incorporate as many voices as I can. Our the Cahuilla people, actually, like many other tribes in California, are in we have a unique situation of not actually being a single nation like the Navajo Nation or something like this. We have 9 bands of Cahuilla. So my aim is to do this survey and give it out to all of the 9 bands, and they don't all speak the same dialect either. So I'm going to get different feedback, and my aim is to incorporate, like, as much perspective from all of the different communities on, like, incorporating their dialects, their idiolects, their family dialects, everything down to, like to as much as of the language as we can. And of course, this is only a beginning text. Like, I'm sure there will be more books to be written in the future to address, like, specific parts of the grammar.
All right, I think that's all we have time for today. Let's thank our speaker, Ray Huaute, once again.